Welcome to my next video in the steps method, and this time we're going to discuss pieces with a crucial defending task and their compromised function. So they are tied up to defense, and we can exploit that and win the game by identifying them and then exploiting that vulnerability. Before we do that, I just want to come back to one position that we discussed in the last video, pinning. In this position, black is to move, the queen is under attack. Black played queen h4, and in this position we have to think for ourselves, like, what has changed in the position? Of course, the queen is no longer under attack, the bishop on g4 is attacking the bishop on e2, but also something else has changed, because the queen moved from g5 to h4, the pawn on g7 is no longer defended. And because of that, suddenly we have a pin, pinning the pawn on e5 to the pawn on g7 with the battery bishop b2 and the queen on c3. And what is the pawn on e5 defending? The pawn on e5 is defending the square f4. So instead of moving our bishop away, we can play here immediately the winning move, rook f4, h5, and after h3 we win the bishop on g4. So why am I mentioning this? Because I think if you look to chess, it's important to find the right moves, but it is equally important to ask the right questions about the position. So if you would ask in this position, what has changed in the position, and you would see that g7 is no longer defended and white is actually a pin, and you would ask the subsequent question, what is e5 defending? Then you would find immediately, without hesitation, the move rook f4. In the game, Caruana played the move bishop d3, like an automatic, and he's still slightly better, but he went on to lose the game, while after rook f4, black could resign. So it's not trivial to ask yourself the right question about a position. And just as we're going to discuss today, in the theme, a pinned piece is a poor defender, it's about a compromised functioning of a piece, in this case the pawn on e5. And now we're going to see examples of compromised functioning because pieces are tied up to the defense. So this position occurred 8 times in the Lead Chess database, and in none of these games white exploited the vulnerability that exists in the position. So take a moment to think for yourself and think about what you would play in this position. So you can think about moves like h4, that was played, queen f2 to prevent castling because of bishop c5, or you could play a move like king b1, bringing the king into safety, or bishop e2, developing your final piece and connecting the rooks. Now, if we ask ourselves, which piece in this position is tied up to the defense? Which piece has a crucial defending function? Then you would recognize that the queen on e7 has a very important function, defending d8. Normally a queen is worth 9 or 10 points, but this queen has only one function, and that is preventing the mate on d8 for the moment. Of course, if black has time, black would play something like bishop e6, and then rook d8, or castle, and then the rook on a8 would be defending the square d8. So it's temporary, but at this moment, the value of the queen on e7 has been severely compromised. At the moment that you ask this question, and I did this in the Adult Improver series at the Charlotte Chess Center, without hesitation, people say, I would play here bishop c5 to activate my bishop and take advantage of this queen that is so tied up to the defense. And then after queen c7, bishop d6, white wins the pawn on e5. And after queen d7, we have a discovered attack with queen g5. I discussed this position in more detail in the video finding the best move, and about activity and vulnerability. And after bishop c5, of course, black has a crazy defense starting with bishop h6, and watch the other video to learn about this. In the 8 games in the Lichess Games database, none of the players played bishop c5, and white scored 3 out of 8. So let's ask ourselves the question in this position: which black piece has a crucial defending task? Which black piece is tied up to defending? Well, white would like to play f6 followed by queen g7. Checkmate. So who's preventing that? The queen on c6. And because the queen is defending that, we can play a move like bishop b5 or bishop c4. Which of the two moves is stronger? Bishop b5 looks very attractive because it wins the exchange on e8. But it's not so clear. Black has some compensation here. For instance, after h4, knight e2 with a double attack on the two rooks, rook d1, attacking counter-attack on the queen, queen b6, and now if we want to keep the rook on the g file to put pressure on g6, queen g4, queen f2, suddenly the position has become very unclear. And even after a move like rook g2, queen f8, and after a queen trade, we have reached an equal position because black has a pawn majority on the queen side. And that gives black and a very active knight on an outpost, that gives black compensation. So bishop c4 is actually, of course, a very strong move. What is the point of bishop c4? Well, bishop c4 is pinning the pawn on f7 to the king. And suddenly, if we now look at the number of attackers on g6, we have 1, we have 2, we have 3 attackers. And who are the only defenders in this case? We have a queen defending g6 and we have a pawn defending g6. So we have 2 defenders and 3 attackers. So g6 is under attack because f7 is a poor defender of the pawn on g6. And let's see, I have some responses like bishop a6, like please take my rook because I have compensation because of my active knight and the pawn majority on the queen side. White already can open the position and get a winning position. And if black would say, I'm just going to overprotect the 7th rank and f7, then white is also winning with force. So bishop c4 is possible in this position, but we have to ask ourselves the question, which piece has a crucial defending task and is tied up to the defense? What is this piece defending or actually not defending? Just as we do with a pinned piece as a poor defender, the compromised functioning of this piece, and then we can see that we can play bishop c4 with a devastating attack. This is a game between Krasenkov and Sveshnikov, and of course let's do the orientation. We see that the rook is cutting off the king. Then we see the knight on h6 and we say, okay, knight f7 would be checkmate, but there is a defender. So we identified again that the queen has a crucial defending task of this pawn. How can we exploit it? It means that actually we can play the move queen e2, attacking the defender, right? So we're striving to eliminate the defender. And at this moment Sveshnikov resigned, because he noticed, of course, that after bishop e6, white has a forced win. Can you find a win? Knight takes f7, queen takes f7, queen e5, and black is mated. New position. In this position, black is a piece up. And if we would play something natural, like knight g5, black has to defend f6. And then the queen is nicely defending this pawn on h7. The bishop is no longer pinning the knight on e5. The knight is under attack by the pawn. And of course we also threaten knight d3 with a double attack on the king and the bishop on b2. So that is not working. So let's get back to the original position and ask ourselves which piece has a crucial defending task, which piece is tied up. And again, in this position, it's the queen in the defense of the rook. And then we ask ourselves what other squares or pieces is the queen defending. And then we find, of course, the solution to the puzzle, knight f6. So for me, this is not, you could say, being overloaded or overworked. It really has to do with the fact that a piece is tied up and its function has been compromised. In this position, if we would say two moves with the same color and mate that we use to find the target mating square, right? We could pick up the queen and say queen e7 would be checkmate. So now we can figure out the route to that square. And there are two ways to get there. We can play queen b4 or we can play queen c5. Black is a piece up, but the king, of course, of black is very unsafe. And of course, now we start to calculate and we recognize that actually white is having a back rank mate if it wasn't for the defense of the queen. So in this position, let me take away the arrows. The queen is tied up to the defense of c8. If the queen was not there, we could play rook c8, rook takes c8, rook takes c8, checkmate, because the pawn on f6 prevents the king from going to e7. So we play queen to b4 with the double threat of taking on b8 and playing queen e7 checkmate. So after queen takes b4, we execute our threat and we checkmate the black king. So what is going on here? White is to move, always next to the square h1. You can see the white dot. And black is threatening mate in 1 with queen c2. Black is also threatening to take the bishop on b5. But now we have to ask ourselves the question, which piece has a central defending task? Well, it's clear that the queen has a central defending task of this pawn on the bishop on c6. That is very clear, because if the queen would just move away to and take, for instance, the bishop on h4, bishop takes c6, king d8, bishop, queen d7 would be checkmate. But is there another square that this queen is defending? Well, actually, there's another threat, which is queen e7, but queen e7 is now currently defended by both the queen and, of course, there's a pawn in between. But we can eliminate all the defenses by playing rook e5, and after queen e5 we have our mate, and after rook e5, of course, if the pawn takes, then we have queen e7 mate. So we're exploiting the fact that this queen has such an important defensive task again. And actually two. So have a moment and look at this position. And can you see which piece has a central defending task? Of course, when you start looking here, you could say, oh, the queen is defending two pieces, right? It should be about this. But when you start analyzing brute force, you could say, okay, you know, two moves with the same color and mate would be knight g5, queen h7. Right? So, what is the defense against knight g5? And then you would say queen g7 is a defense against knight g5, queen h7 checkmate. Once we realize that the queen has a central defending task, is tied up to the defense of the square g7, we can find the move rook a2, and after queen a2, knight g5. You can say, why is this actually winning? Because can the king not run away? Well, white has a devastating attack. You can see, of course, that we are threatening to take on e6. We have queen c7 checkmate. All the bishop on c2 is loose, the knight on b6 is loose, and we continue to have a very strong attack, and white is winning. And this all came from the fact that we had to realize that the queen on b2 had a crucial defending task of the square g7, and in that sense was tied up and could not defend both c2 and g7 at the same time. I would like to close out with this position. So take a moment and try to figure out which pieces have a crucial defending task, which pieces are being tied up. Because we're going to learn a tip here. So if you have paused the video and are back, you will notice, of course, that this bishop has a very important function in defending the rook. If the bishop moves, we have queen takes f8, checkmate. Then, of course, we also see that white has an attack on h7. So we have two attacks, and that's currently being defended by the rook and the queen. And the rule is, if you have two defenders which are both so crucial, often you can eliminate that defense by going to the intersection of those two defenders. So the intersection of the bishop on d6 defending f8 and the rook on d7 defending h7 is the square e7. So we play rook e7, and now black can no longer defend the mate. Bishop takes e7, queen h7, and after rook takes f7 we have queen f8 mate. I think this is a pretty unique concept that is not covered a lot in chess, and I really like it myself. Normally pieces, right, when you look at their force, like a queen has 9 points, if it's tied up to the defense, it has limited value, and we can actually exploit it. I hope you like this video, and I hope to see you again back, and that you subscribe to my channel. Thank you.